Okay, so today we're going deep on some recent Trump administration moves on immigration here in the U.S., and we've got transcripts from CBS News, News Nation, MSNBC to try to get the full picture. You know,
Yeah, it sounds like a lot to cover.
it is, and specifically, what we're going to try to do in this deep dive is figure out what's the scope, what are the implications of these policies, particularly for international students and anyone facing deportation.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what we've got from these sources, it's everything from student visas to changes in like enforcement to even using social media in these decisions.
Right, right. Okay, so let's start with the international student visa. CBS News was reporting on, um, a significant number. They said hundreds of international students and recent grads who could be facing deportation.
Hundreds. Wow.
Yeah, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, according to this reporting, said these potential revocations are linked to pro-Palestinian activity,
Hmm.
and he suggested that it could impact more than 300 students at least 80 colleges and universities.
Okay, so right away, what's really sticking out to me is just the sheer scale of this and also that it's directly tied to, political expression.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for a cabinet member to be publicly saying that visa revocations are tied to specific activity on campuses, that raises some serious questions about like how wide is this net they're casting and what exactly are they using to make these decisions?
Totally. And we're talking about a huge number of people possibly impacted. I
Yeah,
mean,
definitely.
and CBS actually included some direct quotes from students, experiencing this. And the words they used were just powerful, like anxiety, tension, fear about their future and whether they could even finish their
Yeah,
study.
I bet. It's easy to forget the human element when we're talking policy. But
Exactly.
these are people whose whole lives, academic and personal, are here in the U.S. So this kind of uncertainty just throws everything into chaos for them.
Absolutely. And they talked to an immigration attorney named Len Saunders, who actually, he was a student visa holder himself back in the day. And he has over 25 years of experience in immigration law.
Wow. Okay, so he knows this stuff inside and out.
He does. He does. And he called this whole situation with student visa revocations unprecedented. And coming from him, that carries a lot of weight.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, when someone's been through the system themselves and then has decades of experience on the legal side, and then they use a word like unprecedented, something's really shifted.
Exactly. And he pointed out this procedural change that's really worrying. He said in the past, when a student visa was revoked, it didn't automatically mean they had to leave immediately.
Okay.
But now he's seeing ICE getting involved and requiring immediate departure.
Oh, wow. So that's a big difference because it changes a visa revocation from something that you could potentially like fix, an administrative problem to an enforcement action with serious consequences.
Right. And according to Saunders, it sounds like the options students had before are disappearing. He mentioned that in the past, people might have been told to leave and then reapply and show that whatever the issue was had been taken care of. But that doesn't seem to be working anymore.
Wow. So that really raises the question of due process for these students, right?
Exactly.
The ability to understand why a decision was made and then have a chance to respond or appeal. That's a fundamental part of any fair legal process. And if that's being taken away, that's a big problem.
Agreed. Okay, so let's shift gears to enforcement measures. News Nation was talking about a couple potential policy changes that could have a major impact.
Okay.
So one is possible fines up to $1,000 per day for people who don't follow deportation orders.
$1,000 a day.
Yeah, and the other is they could potentially seize property if someone doesn't self-deport.
Whoa, those are serious penalties.
They are. They are. I mean,
Yeah, we're talking about a big escalation in the consequences for not leaving when they're told to. Especially those daily fines could add up fast.
oh, for sure. For sure. And when we say self-deport, what we mean is someone leaving the country voluntarily after being ordered to by immigration authorities versus being like formally removed by ICE.
Right, right.
And Reuters added to this, they said these fines could even be applied retroactively. Right.
Retroactively.
Meaning people could be hit with fines going back who knows how far
Wow.
and potentially reaching over $1 million for some immigrants.
That's life-ruining.
Yeah, it's a massive financial burden. I mean,
And this retroactive thing, that's a key point, right? Because
yeah,
people might have been operating under a totally different understanding of what would happen if they didn't follow a deportation order.
right, right.
And now they could be on the hook for huge amounts of money they never saw coming.
Yeah, and News Nation also said this push for tougher enforcement involves bringing back a law from 1996.
1996.
Yeah, this law was used by Trump during his first term, but then Biden got rid of it. So it looks like they're dusting off an old tool from the toolbox.
Interesting. So that tells us something about the administration's approach, right? They're
Yeah.
choosing to go back to these enforcement mechanisms that were used before. It's a deliberate choice.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so then there's this agreement between the IRS and Homeland Security, specifically ICE, to share taxpayer data.
Mm.
News Nation reported that ICE can now give the IRS names of people they suspect are undocumented, and the IRS will check that against their tax records.
Interesting.
And this includes sharing the addresses of anyone with a removal order issued within the past 90 days. So basically, we're seeing a new level of cooperation between government agencies when it comes to immigration enforcement.
Yeah, this is a big deal because it gives ICE access to a ton of information from the IRS to help them find people who are supposed to be deported.
Right.
But it also raises these questions about, privacy, how much is too much when it comes to law enforcement and people's personal information.
Yeah, I mean, the Department of Homeland Security did release a statement defending the information sharing agreement, but
Yeah.
we don't have the specifics of what they said from the transcript we're looking at.
Yeah, but it's safe to assume they'd say it's necessary to enforce immigration laws effectively.
Right, right. Okay, so let's talk social media screening now. MSNBC said the administration is planning to screen immigrants' social media for signs of anti-Semitism, and they'll use this information when deciding whether to grant permanent residency or even revoke student visas.
That opens up a whole can of worms.
It does, because now you're talking about free speech, and how do you even judge these things fairly?
Exactly. I mean, as Jessica Levinson from Loyola Law School pointed out, there's no universally accepted definition of hate speech, or in this case, anti-Semitism.
Right.
So without clear guidelines, it's just ripe for subjective interpretations and inconsistent application.
For sure. And Andrea Flores for us, she said she doesn't think this is really about public safety or national security.
Oh.
She thinks the real goal is to deport every immigrant.
Wow.
Yeah. And she was also worried about green card holders. The lawful permanent residents potentially losing their status because of something they posted online in the past.
That's a huge deal.
It is. It is, because now you're not just talking about people who are trying to get in.
Huh.
You're talking about people who have already built lives here.
Yeah, her perspective really highlights the fear a lot of immigrant advocates have that these policies are about more than just specific threats. They're about a much broader crackdown.
Totally. Totally. And then MSNBC also had this really troubling statement from acting IC Director Todd Lyons. He talked about his dream of massive immigrant roundups for deportation.
Okay.
And he even compared it to how efficiently Amazon delivers packages.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And the commentators on MSNBC were right to call that out as dehumanizing language.
Yeah, I mean, comparing human beings to packages being shipped around, it's just awful. It completely strips away their dignity and feeds into this idea that immigrants aren't really people.
Exactly. And Jessica Levinson brought up another crucial point about the legal side of this.
Okay.
She reminded us that while immigration itself is often seen as an administrative grace, meaning it's a benefit the government gives you,
Right.
people who are physically here in the U.S., they have constitutional rights.
Right, of course.
So going after people based on what they say, even in the context of immigration, raises big questions about those protections and about due process, especially after some of the recent Supreme Court rulings on deportation.
It's so important to remember that the government's power isn't unlimited, especially when it comes to fundamental rights like free speech.
Exactly.
Any policy that tries to restrict those rights has to be looked at very carefully.
For sure. And Levinson also talked about how the definition of anti-Semitism itself is tricky,
Yeah.
because it could be used to silence legitimate criticism of the Israeli government's policies.
It's a slippery slope.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So, we've got this potential surge in student visa revocations, maybe hundreds of students impacted and in some cases tied to their views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah.
We've got the possibility of huge fines, property seizures for people who don't follow deportation orders, and those could even be retroactive.
Right.
And we've got increased data sharing between the IRS and ICE, and these plans to scrutinize immigrants' social media for anti-Semitism. It's a lot. It paints a picture of a really active and rapidly changing landscape for immigration enforcement.
It really does. And like Len Saunders said about the student visas, the speed and the scale of some of these actions, it's not business as usual.
Definitely not. So, with all this in mind, the complexities of immigration law, the fundamental rights that individuals have, the authority of the government, it leaves us with some pretty heavy questions. What are the long-term consequences of these policies going to be, both for the people directly affected and for the values of the United States as a whole?
Yeah, what does it mean for us as a society?
Exactly. And what does all this make you think about the balance between national security and individual liberties? It's a lot to process, and we encourage everyone to keep digging into these crucial issues. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.